Anita, and welcome everyone who's listening to our latest episode of our Data and AI podcast. I'm with the wonderful Anita today, who's had a brilliant career in data and insights, and we're going to be discussing her highs and lows, as well as the challenges that she has faced over her career around diversity and inclusion. This topic is then going to tie into Harnham's white paper on DE&I that we're going to be launching in the next few months. I think Anita is going to be an amazing person to hear from today, because she actually won Adweek's Europe Future is Female Award, which is an EU-wide industry award that is highly recognised. She won this based on 3 key areas, including professional achievements, commitment to organisational change, and commitment to external impact. So we'll get stuck right in. I would love to know from yourself, Anita, about how you began your career in data and a summary of the last 30 years, if it's possible to summarise your career.
Great. Thank you, India. And it's a pleasure to be here today. So as India said, my name's Anita Caras. Yes, scarily 30 odd years in the business. I'll try and do it justice in not too much detail. I guess, how did I get into data and analytics and insights? Short answer is by accident. And many people I talk to go down that same sort of route. Originally, I wanted to be an airline pilot. So I studied physics to A-level standards. I was an active member of the Air Cadets. And then pre-university, I actually went to a career fair and got told that women could fix planes, but they couldn't fly them, which obviously devastated me. Back then, fact-checking wasn't as accessible as it is now. We didn't have mobile phones. Yes, I am that old. So I took that statement at face value and completely then changed what I was going to do as a degree at university. So I ended up going into media production. And from there, my first job was with Granada TV and ITV. And I was researching programs. And over the course of that job was started to be downsized. And so I was asked whether I wanted to join the commercial research team. So that was then analysing the performance of programs, optimising schedules, and conducting ad research. And I guess from there, the rest is history. I did take a little break. I did, after a stint at Granada TV, I took 18 months out to travel the world, which I highly recommend to everyone. If you ever get the opportunity to do that at some point and take that break. And then joined a media agency where I was a media research analyst, used to write reports such as ISBA's TV quarterly reports and support their planners and buyers. From there, I became an MTV girl, which I absolutely loved, and did a variety of roles, saw lots of behind the scenes stars at the time, but headed up their UK commercial research team there. And from there joined Microsoft, which was perhaps polarized in terms of corporate culture between MTV and Microsoft. Again, had a number of positions, but that included leading the European research team, went on to help run and co-run the EMEA marketing organization, and then headed up their advertising partnerships team and oversaw all their global research projects for their key accounts and agencies. And this is where sort of corporate life kind of comes in and gives you a thrust in the opposite direction. Microsoft decided to transition their advertising business over to AOL. So I was part of that 2P transfer and became an employee rep and a spokesperson for that, which led me to lead their international research organization there. And that sort of followed me through my career into Oath, Verizon Media, and finally Yahoo. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I was exposed to a number of things across, but there were a few curveballs along the way that meant I changed companies, changed jobs and roles, and had to be open to that along that path.
Wow. I mean, look, all of that sounds absolutely amazing. And I think the teams that you have headed up at MTV, co-running EMEA marketing, heading up an advertising partnerships team, like you've obviously had some very big leadership roles. Was the role at MTV the first time that you became that you were in a leadership position, or did it start before then?
I would say, actually, if I think about what I define as a leader versus a manager, sort of manager
Yeah.
managing teams and doing the day-to-day into the leader, I would probably say it was at Microsoft where I started to find my leadership shoes. That's about sort of, I suppose, 20 years ago now. And the reason for that was, it was there that I started to really recognize the importance of having regular conversations, not just with my immediate peer groups, as well as my team
Yeah.
members, but to think about the superiors and my managers of managers, and how could I get exposure higher up the food chain to really start to enable me to evolve the role of my team, of my organization, and of myself in my career. And without that, I wouldn't have ever been, as a researcher, been thought of as being able to lead a marketing function, for example. I wouldn't have been voted in to lead the employee reps and be the spokesperson of that if I hadn't had, I suppose, that thought about those responsibilities and how I could really manage upwards. And I think that's kind of interesting, because as I went into Yahoo, my final sort of employer in the list, there I became the global co-chair for the Women's Inclusion Network. And that's actually been my biggest leadership role, because we had over 800 active members. Now, that's a voluntary role, but I had a direct report into the CFO of Yahoo, where I'd never have had that exposure to a lady based out of the US who literally runs the whole of the financial operation for Yahoo in the role that I had, and then was responsible for thinking about what that budget looked like, how we could get that budget, what the programming was going to be like, what our strategy was, and feeding straight back into the CFO. So through that voluntary piece, actually then showed a lot of those leadership skills, and were enabled me to sort of manage a much broader base than my immediate sort of role, or my paid for role day to day.
That's amazing. So, and I imagine you'd have been such an influential person for, over 800 people. How did you come about going for that position? How did you get there?
So that again was there's quite a bit of backstory, I guess, to that. But back at AOL days, I sat down with the HR lead at the time, who was running the UK organisation, and we sort of literally, classic UK style, in the pub on the back of a beer mat, said, what could we do for females at the company? Like, what things are missing? And did a bit of a brainstorm just between the two of us. And from there, we started an organisation, very small women's group. That then came with me to Yahoo, who already had a women's organisation, but sort of some of the styles of strategy that I had put in place, and sort of pillars to get senior leadership involved in having a influence and having an appetite for this type of work, really helped us in securing bigger budgets. It enabled us to, for example, run individual coaching programs for all of the female members in the UK. And this is with professional coaches, and it was over a diverse range of topics. So it didn't have to be in leadership and management. It could be in nutrition, or it could be in stress, which again wasn't a thing actually spoken about 5-10 years ago. Stress management at work really wasn't as in our culture and in the news as it is today, sort of post-pandemic and during the pandemic kind of got it to a hiatus. So all of these things are things we started to talk about, which then started to think about our recruitment practices, and then bring in sort of the HR and the talent acquisition people on board to think about where do we hire from, and how can we make that more diverse? What other groups do we need in this organisation, and who can be the champions for those? And do we outreach to them? Do they kind of volunteer? And all of those things sort of kind of evolved with it as we went through, and became bigger and bigger, to the point where I was elected as being sort of the global chair of the Yahoo ERG organization. So yes, again, I wouldn't say it was something that was conscious for me. It was kind of an accident, a passion point, absolutely. And I think a lot of these little side hustles that people do are really important for you to find what your passion points are as you go through your career, so that you can weave that into your day-to-day work to give it more value and for you to really enjoy what you do. I mean, I think that's what everyone talks about, isn't it? It's like, the best jobs are those that you don't think that you're working because you're doing things that you love. And I think that's really difficult, right? You need to earn a certain amount to pay your mortgage, to pay your bills. The reality is there's going to be things you don't like, perhaps, in the roles that you do. But I would argue that you can always find a side hustle that starts to pivot to some of those passion points. And that comes really important as you go through your career, for you to start to align to what your value set is and make sure that you're doing roles that align with that give you the gratitude and that personal buzz, as well as the people around you, because they'll feed off you, particularly if you're a manager or a leader of an organization. They'll feed off that energy and that positive energy that you need to bring. And you only can bring that if it's genuine, I think, day in, day out.
I think that's amazing. And the way you've developed that through several different companies is definitely impressive, for sure. I suppose it'd be interesting to know, when you first started doing these projects, getting people involved, how was it received throughout the business? Because it seems like it was quite different, new, sort of going against the status quo a little bit.
Yeah,
perhaps?
it was definitely a new idea. I mean, it really helped when I started up from scratch, having the HR lead at UK rooting with me. We were literally a double act on this. So that meant she already had the ear of the EMEA leadership team. Again, that gave me entry points into the EMEA leadership team to talk about these things and to really sort of say why we would want to go down this route. And I think it's really critical in all of work, whether it's in DEI or anything else, when you're thinking about what you want to achieve, and you can see that it's going to do some good for the people, you've got to then balance that with, well, how does this align with what the business objectives are? How is that really going to align with, if it's shareholder run, are the shareholders going to sign this off? What is the upside for the business as well as for the employees? And yes, happy employees hopefully will be far more productive and go on to drive further results. But for me, us thinking about those sustainable ecosystems in the hiring practices that we have, thinking about inclusion right the way through our office space, and how we may have quiet spaces versus more open source spaces where people can interact and navigate, so people can, depending on whether they need more solitude or they need more stimulus, be able to go to different places and spaces. And thinking about some of the cultures, the corporate culture as it was then, how can we perhaps tweak that around the edges to make that more inclusive and actively, if we see people that are different to us, can we make sure that they're involved in some of those discussions that are being had? Do they have friends, peer groups, etc., that they want to encourage into that organisation? And can we reward in that way to make sure that we have more diversity of voices around a table? So all of those things were things we started to flesh out. We started to get ideas, and it was through getting results. So everything, I suppose this goes back to then my research background, was everything had to be measured in my mind, to actually go back to leadership and say, we said we were doing X, we did that delivered Y, we now need these budgets because we're going to dial it up by another 5, or we're going to scale it across Europe, and all the time seeing that incremental growth and being able to measure that. And there are things that didn't work, and we'll be honest about that and get the feedback from the members. But I think that really enabled us to have a journey, and that enabled us to then get hard budgets behind the DEI space, as I had a hard budget for the research and the data that I was buying into the business.
Wow. And so what years was this sort of at the height with everything you were doing? Like how?
Well, see, it went right the way up through to Yahoo. Yahoo still got a
Yeah.
active ERG community of various organisations and groups. So it's went right the way through my career, really, from my time at AOL onwards. So yeah, the last sort of 10 years plus I've been sort of working in the ERG spaces as well.
Wow. And look, I imagine there's been numerous challenges through setting all of those different like D&I projects up, of course. Is there something that you remember as being your like the biggest challenge that you faced in your career?
I think for me, the biggest challenge always, and this is going to be faced by everyone, is actually change management itself in your career, because these are things that usually are beyond your control. These are the curveballs that come in, and it's about us thinking about how do we embrace those experiences and see those as opportunities rather than threats. And there's I guess there's three real key sort of examples for me that sort of changed sort of the course of what we were doing or what the team was doing itself. So the first I sort of started to talk about, which was the 2P transfer from Microsoft to AOL. Maybe I should have at that point, and I didn't 20 years ago, I'm far more active now, read all of the business press around Microsoft and be able to read between the lines a little bit better in terms of knowing. But for me, that actually took me by surprise at that point in time. I didn't know that suddenly I was going to leave something that I had 6 interviews to get into Microsoft, was vested in Microsoft as a brand and the business. And I was being transferred over to another organization that I hadn't actively engaged with or recruited for. And that was a really weird feeling. And on top of that, there was already a leader in the insights and strategy team there. There was somebody leading AOL Insights and Strategy. So for me, if I wanted to be part of this process and get a job that was at the level that I wanted, I had to quickly think about how I could positively influence a whole new set of stakeholders in a whole new company that never hired me, never chose me, etc. So I actually took on that role, although it was suggested to me by a number of people. The reason I actually put my foot in the ring, and I wasn't somebody at that point that would always be the first person to put my hand up. I would always see if somebody else would put it up first, and if they did, I would follow through. But the reason I took the lead employee rep role and ended up being the key spokesperson was I then going, hang on a minute, I could use this to my advantage, because here I'm going to get exposure to the AOL's senior leadership team. I'm going to be able to actively help in the decision making of how this 2P process works and what the employees need out of it. And through that, start to showcase the value that I can bring to this organization, which will put me in far better stead when I start to have those conversations around what I want for a career and what value I can bring with my expertise in insights and data to that organization. And so that's why I did it, and it worked. I ended up getting that lead job over and above, and I was the underdog in that. There was somebody already there that was already having those, already part of the team. So that for me then was a real big learning curve of when to really lean in, right, and really take the plunge. And then there's been sort of 2 things, I suppose, in data that have been really key. One is the demise of the cookie that has been talked about for a number of years, but is going to be with us by the end of next year. I had a team of researchers, experts in research that had won awards, etc. But our primary data source was third-party data. And it was how do we still do some of the stuff we do when we are reliant on that third-party data. Now, the fortunate thing was with Verizon Media and then Yahoo, they had access to a lot of first-party data through logged in users for their email accounts and also for their search accounts. So I needed to do a transition within the team of getting the reliance away, or at least have a balanced ecosystem of third party and first party data, and how could we use this first party data to our advantage as we move into a cookieless world. So I could have done one of two things. I could have got rid of a few members of the team and hired some programmers that could really go in and critique this data, clean this data and give it back. Or I could look at my team members and think, are there people here that could do this role if they were retrained? And do they want to do this role if they had that opportunity? It was a longer bet, but I did the second. And that proved really, really fruitful because it gave me loyalty within the staff. It gave appreciation that they were learning new skill sets and being invested in the business. And it enabled us to have a team then that had both third-party and first-party data assets at their disposal that really helped our customer base and has helped us with the measurement challenges that we faced, as well as meaning that we've been far more active in some of the other business conversations around privacy concerns and respecting consumer privacy and the value exchange, and all of those kind of conversations came into the mix. So that, for me, was a real pivotal move where, again, I had two choices. And for me, it was placing the bets on the talent that we had existing in the business and investing in them and making sure that the company was behind me in that investment to get us to a point where we didn't have to solely rely on third-party data. And that also enabled us to cut some of our budgets because then we didn't have to buy in so much third-party data. So it was a win-win. So that, yes, there was an investment in the team, but then there was cost saving that was had in terms of some of that third-party data assets.
I mean, I think those are brilliant examples. You've obviously had so many different successes in your career, like winning the, getting the employee rep role, these ideas that have then had the company backing, these revenue achievements. I guess if your career is based off, like team revenue achievements, business achievements, as well as your, the side hustles and the passion points you've had as well, is there something that you would state would be your most successful your most successful time?
I think it's strange because success has changed with me. For me now, the success comes in helping others. And one of the reasons I got the award, because you have to be nominated by others to get the award, is through sort of the mentoring that I do voluntary across. And I think this is where I think defining success is really when you can start to realize that it's crucial for us to all personally define what success means for us. So where I think that gets really tricky is we all looked for external validation, and I'm guilty of it too, right? Because you're always comparing yourself to someone else in various situations. It's a personal trait, and maybe that helps us in progress. Yes, if you're always sort of aiming higher, aiming different. But I also think we have to kind of keep that in check because when we have those external pressures, whether that's friends, family, peer, and now social media, right, it also plays a role. Are you ever going to achieve that success? For me, true success is when you really start to understand your own value set, when you can start to speak within the corporate space as well as in your personal space authentically, be able to be brave enough to be able to say what's in your heart and have that agency to make your own choices. Now that comes, I think, as you learn and get that self-awareness for yourself and get comfortable in what drives you and, quite frankly, what doesn't. If money drove everyone, I think all of us would be salespeople, right? That were looking for big sales bonuses at the end. But we're not. I took a career in data and insights. So there are different facets to people in what drives various people, and it's about figuring that out. And again, I'm a big believer in side hustles. They're not a distraction. Distraction to me. They're definitely not a distraction. they enable us to experiment in a
Mm,
relatively safe space. If you're doing that as a part-time thing, you can then sort of see where that
mm,
leads and find where your passion points are and what really gives
mm,
you joy. So for me, it is around helping others, which I found out because I genuinely enjoy managing people. Now, I don't think everyone does. I think a lot of people go into management because I think
yeah.
that is the career progression that you have to
Mm,
command more respect, more salary,
mhm,
a
mhm.
better title or wherever. But genuinely, the reason I got into research was I think I'm just nosy. I like to understand what makes people tick, what
Yeah.
motivates people. And that's the same in management, right? If you
Mm,
really want to take a genuine interest in people and understand what motivates them, you can start to think about how roles and responsibilities can be a two-way process of giving value
mhm,
back to business, but also value back to an individual. And,
mhm.
and I would expect that as a business owner, you want your managers to be doing that. You want your managers to be understanding the people. People always say, or businesses always say, that people are their biggest asset. I don't think that's always
Mm,
true. I think people say lip service to that. It's when you actually really understand those drivers, there are always ways you can
mm,
tweak a role to make it more amenable or match a person or other. And if
mm,
really you can't, then they're in the wrong role and they need to transition somewhere else, whether that's within the business or
mm.
have those conversations of where else. But for me, that's a responsibility as a manager.
Definitely. I think that's really interesting because we've definitely seen that portrayed more recently within recruitment. I think when I first started at Harnham 6 years ago, even then, interviewing was very much the manager will ask you loads of questions. If they like you, great, they'll progress you to the next stage. And now the processes are much more two-sided. A candidate might say, well, actually, like, I want to find out more about you and what am I going to learn? And, what can you teach me? Like, what gaps do I have that I'm then going to learn by joining your company? And I've definitely seen that develop more and more over the past few years, and this sort of two-sided way of doing things, which I think is great, because again that leads to what you mentioned before around the loyalty, the appreciation, like less being the sort of top-down approach and more of the we do value our people, and it being a bit less on on the lip service side for sure. I'd love to come back to advice that you would give around these, because I've definitely got some questions I want to ask you there. But before we get into that, I guess it'd be great to go through perhaps some of the biggest changes that you've seen in the data industry or the media industry over the past 30 years.
I mean, I talked about change management a bit. I
Mm,
suppose the other area I'd say from a data perspective is, I suppose we can't have a podcast without talking a little bit about AI. So let's sort of go into that, and then I'll shift a little bit into corporate culture.
yeah.
But I think with AI, I am using the same practices that I use really for the demise of the cookie, insofar as approaching it with an open
Mm,
mind. I think that's where you've got to start. We need to
mm,
test and learn. We need to understand the capabilities of AI, where it can enhance efficiency, and it definitely can in many scenarios, and particularly in that research and analytics
yeah.
space. When we think about can it help in programming language? Can it help in summarizing open-ended questions? Can it help in tweaking? But I think where research really comes into its own and having that foundation in traditional research design
Mm,
is where it starts to enable us to ask the right questions of AI,
mm,
to set the parameters, establish those conditions in where it should operate, and be able to identify bias, because that is wholly obviously driven by the training data that you're putting into the AI systems that you're
yeah.
working with. So in order for us to sort of see the positives, we've also got to see where the gaps are and where those
Mm,
biases are. And I think that's where traditional research design, in terms of writing questionnaires that are
mm,
not leading, that are more open-ended, and seeing where those results take us, and using our critical minds to
mm,
really sort of decipher, okay, this is true to where it needs to be, this still needs more work, is definitely
mm.
something that we need to be aware of, and make sure that the human intervention is there. with AI. But it's definitely an exciting time. It's definitely a time saver, and it's definitely going to change all industries, including the research, data, and analysis insight industry as we see it.
Definitely.
And in terms of thinking about 30 years where I've seen some of the biggest changes, I would say the biggest change actually has been in corporate culture. And we sort of touched on that in your recruiting practices, right? We're seeing that growing awareness in terms of that importance of inclusion, importance of sustainable practices, in terms of who we hire and the people that we work with and the organizations that we work with. But I think the biggest challenge to organizations now is they've all got their value statements, they've all got their what their brand is about, their brand D&I. But how do you take it from words on a web page or the sole responsibility of an HR team, or if you're lucky, a DEI team that you've hired within that organization, to become ingrained in the fabric of the company, i.e. the responsibility of every single person within that company? Because it's only when we realize that each and in every person that works within that company is responsible for the brand and an actual is a showcase for the company, that's when you start to care about who you're hiring. How does this really develop the corporate culture in the way that you want it to be developed? And then on the other side, it's then measuring the performance, right? Identifying those gaps and measuring the progress, which again, insights and research can play a key role in defining what those metrics are and how you would then move forward with them.
I actually had a really interesting conversation with one of our clients recently who've really put into practice a lot of the things that they are talking about around diversity inclusion. So they, for example, now have a menopause policy, an assisted conception policy. They have trans inclusion policies. They also had things like you could swap your bank holiday days to a different day that was more important for you, if that was a religious holiday that you yourself celebrate, or perhaps you could use it for Pride. So they were really putting into practice some of the things that I think we've been hearing people talking about for a long time. And I think that was a really refreshing conversation with me for a client, because I was like, wow, these things that you literally have for your employees and people and for your teams is amazing.
Yeah, I think policies is quite. Sorry, I was India. I was just going to say policies is quite an interesting one, because I think what it does, that starts the conversation. It means that people are open to have that conversation. Like if there's a menopause policy, you're like, oh, they've recognised that menopause is a thing, so therefore maybe I can have that conversation. I think it gets really interesting when you can go beyond the need for an ERG or the need for a policy, because that is again part of the corporate structure and ecosystem, and we're not there yet. You kind of need to write the rule book so that people know that they are permitted to engage within that framework to get them to the next level. And that's where I see most businesses, there's a few exceptions, but that's where most businesses are. Where it becomes really interesting is when, as I say, that becomes corporate fabric, and you don't actually kind of need the rule book anymore in that place or space, because that's now become the bench, that becomes the foundation, that becomes what everyone expects, and then we move on from there. But that is, a process that's going to it's going to take a number of years to for us to get there.
I think it's some really positive steps in the right direction. We had a talk from an activist of the LGBTQ plus community. Speaks to all Harnham employees recently, and what they said that was really interesting, that was simple things like putting up posters for Pride, like these little things that may seem quite small, but they're just such big steps forward, like within the D&I space that maybe 10 years ago wouldn't necessarily have existed in lots of spaces. So definitely moving in the right direction. So Anita, we've always had a brilliant conversation about your career and how you had numerous different roles, your passion projects, the different roles within companies that you've then got, the teams that you've led, the stakeholders that you've managed upwards, and everything else that we've just discussed. I guess I would love to know if you had any small snippets of advice that you would give to somebody who has just started their career or is thinking about becoming a leader and they're new to this space but want to have had the achievements and success in the space that someone like yourself has had?
Yeah, I kind of talk about being true to yourself and being authentic. I think that's
Yeah.
number one, is actually getting to know who you are yourself. And you can do many things to try and get to that place and space. I think these days, more than ever, it's about flexibility and being flexible. You might, in your mind's eye, have a role, a goal, a title in mind. But I think, the way to get there is not going to be the same for everyone. And it is about flexibility, being bold and courageous and throwing yourself into new places and spaces and just seeing if it fits or not, right? Along your career, we're not in a place or space where you stay in one organization for the next 20, 30 years. There is that license to change, and we should change and adapt with that. But seeking out those opportunities that really align with your values, and allow you to make a positive impact. And for me, that yes, there's a positive business impact, but a positive personal impact around the people around you really is worthwhile. You're going to make mistakes and embrace those and learn from them. The most important thing is learning. Like, what do you take from those mistakes that you make? And any responsibilities that you get, these are not a given along your career. It's not a given that if you've been at a company for 5 years, you're going to get promotion. These are not a given. So we need to kind of really approach those with kind of gratitude and humility, because there's going to be other people that also wanted that promotion that have missed out or haven't got that opportunity that time round. So it really is, that for me, more about soul finding those skills, skill sets that you've got, but also then finding people that have different skills to you, because everything doesn't happen on your own. You're not an island. People aren't on islands. You've got to act in a team. So that collaboration, teamwork with people with complementary skills that can fill in the gaps, so that you can really shine in the areas that you excel in, really is going to help. I think the other thing, particularly as I've gone into sort of looking for new careers, etc., is that don't underestimate that power of networking. Professional decisions are made when you're not in the room. Most of the decisions about your job, your role, are going to happen when you're not actually present to defend yourself or to put your own case forward. So it's really important to build that strong network and that real sort of sphere of influence that I kind of touched upon when I sort of started sort of my leadership kind of more negotiations at Microsoft. And we're human beings, right? We're not robots. So kind of having that level of vulnerability, talking with honesty, being sociable. People respond to genuine connections.
They buy into you.
Pedestals and glass ceilings. It's not about those titles, it's about you as a person. So I guess there's a lot in there. So to unpack it, I would say embark on careers that stay true to yourself and your values. Be adaptable, be courageous, seek out those meaningful opportunities, learn from mistakes, build a strong network, think about leading with empathy, and always leave that positive impact on those you encounter. And that, I guess, signs me off with a quote. As I say, I don't remember many quotes, but Maya Angelou said something that really resonated with me years back, and I've always taken this to heart. And it's I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget the way you made them feel. And when you think about that and think about striving to put that positive but lasting impression on people, that really starts to change your behavior. And it's definitely worked for me when I think about moments in school that left me mortified and horrified. It's the emotion rather than the actual event that I still feel today. So that's something that I take with me.
Brilliant. I love that quote. Thank you. One final question that's just come into my mind. Would you have any advice of what leaders can do to help facilitate diversity and inclusion?
I think that the biggest is openness to learn. We've all got biases. We've all come, and that's nature, nurture. It's from how that our upbringing, our own personal experiences mean that we will curate the world in a very different way to you will to me, India, and me to anyone else. And it's about us being open to that, to try and unravel that, to be open to new ideas, new experiences, and new responses to things that we may feel are okay, somebody else may not. And I think the more that we learn about that, and the more that we read and reread, one of the biggest defining moments is how biased my history knowledge is from schooling, right? And I thought I went to a really good school, but you know, it's what you're fed, right? And in media, the more that we can think about bias, and that goes back to AI as well, like being able to notify those biases in ourselves, in what we read, and try and be open to read alternative sources that we would perhaps never imagine to see the different perspectives, the more I think we can start to become more inclusive in our mindsets, which naturally translates into our working behaviours, corporate processes, etc., and bring many people on board in that journey, right? Because we are a voice of one. The more voices in the room, the more exposure we're going to have to different sentiments and different iterations along the way.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Anita. It's fantastic to speak to you.
It's been great. Thank you so much for having me this morning.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode, brought to you by the Harnham Group. We'd love it if you would share the podcast on social media and leave a comment or a review to help us reach a bigger audience. If your company is having difficulty finding skilled data professionals, you can rely on the global leader in data and analytics recruitment, staffing and talent development to assist you with your hiring needs. Find out more at www.harnham.com. Thank you for listening.